Almost dawn. Above the landing where I am alone to measure languid surf and swells, and draw enough mist into my lungs to fuel a small ambition for morning, is the exact place the thin crescent moon has tried all night to reach. It has come to witness the slow waking of this day, which I have watched for some time. It is left to me to gather the world's corners into this one place: moon, stars, earth, ocean, sky, and soon the sun, where night will open to the curve of day's certain ascent. That I will hurt today is sure. I know this when I wake, and I carry the knowing to night's mending sleep. How I will hurt others is less clear, what I do so often far from what I intend. Lights go off in houses all along the shore as morning overwhelms their small shine. By chance, only I am here to worry the sun above what matters, red and silent, precisely where I want, what I do to turn the dark world bright. My early years, I lived on a farm in Lemoore, and we moved to the big city of Armona, which had 1,200 people when I was 5.5 years old. And that's where I essentially grew up, went to grammar school, and actually after graduating from college and getting my teaching credential, that's where I went back to teach. Consider the elephant standing on a ball in the circus ring, huge legs bunched together to balance the great weight of evolution on a rolling sphere to the cheering amazement of the crowd. The elephant is not amazed. It knows precisely of what elephants are capable. For just a few minutes of work each day, it is groomed, fed, then left to contemplate mathematic proofs that organize the particulate behavior of light into models for space and time, and seldom is bothered by the trainers trying to learn another of its tricks. Well, I'm Portuguese on both sides of the family. 3 of my grandparents were immigrants from the Azores, and the 4th grandparent, she was a first-generation American born in Massachusetts, but her father and mother came from the Azores. Being Portuguese was always something very important to my father, and he made sure that we understood that growing up. And there were a few activities that we participated in. There was an annual festa, which was a Holy Ghost celebration, in which there was a queen, a big queen and a little queen, and a parade of people from the church to a hall. At the hall, the community was invited to come and eat sopas. Sopas are a meat broth flavored with cabbage and other vegetables and secret spices that no one ever reveals. And this is poured over bread and served with sprigs of mint, and is so delicious. You know, it's still, I'm hungry for it now just thinking about it. The Tachi are the Indian tribe in Kings County where I was born, and their story is very similar to tribes all over California. God comes to the Tachi. By the time the army came to take them to the place no one else wanted, the Tachi already knew Jesus, but believed he was a God who lived in Mexico. God's name changed many times. U.S. Congress, Southern Pacific, Standard Oil, Boswell. But the Tachi remained ignorant of the prayers that would bring sustenance to their thirsty land. Without the right prayer, they became lost, though they stayed in no more than one place. In time, no one asked where the Tachi had gone. Not even God always remembered. But the Tachi never lost love for each other, a devotion which God could not ignore, and so gave them commandments writ on vellum. the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. Accordingly, the Tachi built a sacred palace where the faithful congregate day and night, humble in attitude, hands rich in prayer, and lo, the blessed air fills with the names of God. I don't particularly have a process. I always hope to get a good line, and usually that a poem will build around that. Sometimes I get the ending line, sometimes the beginning line. Sometimes I get a line that ends up getting discarded in the process of writing the poem. I write slowly. I don't really know what my subject is until I'm halfway through the poem. And then by that time I'm shaping it. It's writing for me is a discovery. You know, I'm just as anxious to see where what's going to come out is. Well, I wouldn't say as anyone else, but I'm very anxious to see what's going to come out because it's always something of a surprise. Why I am not a vegetarian. It's not that I love animals less. A case could be made, I love them more. And it's not that I love vegetables less. I love them rare, nothing more savory than raw celery screaming and kicking its way down the gullet. What I find hard to stomach is vegetarians. If there's a vegetarian at the table, we all get called in to be witnesses at a police lineup. Cheese, eggs, fish, each suspect paraded for identification, pronounced innocent, guilty, please take 2 steps forward. And it's not like there's just one canon for the good host to worry about. Each vegetarian comes with a different menu. Most won't eat anything that had legs, although many eat fish, a fin nothing like a leg, and eat shrimp that have legs, which count as fins since they come from the sea and taste so good in a Newburgh sauce. Oysters are problematic, without legs and from the sea, but mostly eaten alive, like carrots. A few pass on eggs because of the latent leg potential, though pasta is usually okay, the potential hard to realize under the marinara. One friend doesn't drink milk, but asks for extra au jus for his mashed potatoes. I don't have the heart to explain what kind of vegetable the O is, or how many get squeezed to make a cup of jus. Don't misunderstand. I admire those who stand on principle, however vague. Who doesn't admire the resolve of, say, Jerry Falwell, to bear the weight of so much conviction he can hardly walk to church? Praise the Lord for limousines. As my mother would say, live and let live. Just keep the details to yourself. And pass the ketchup, please. Without exaggeration, it changed my life. I dabbled in poetry, rhymey kind of verse in journals. And I liked poetry. I liked reading poetry. I memorized poems that I liked. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. But when I got to Fresno State, there was a class. I needed an English class. There was a class called Poetry Writing, and it was taught by Philip Levine, although I didn't know who he was. I didn't know one that was there to tell me. And he wasn't famous then, except in the English circles. He had had only one book that had come out several years before from a small press. He was a great teacher. It's hard to explain why he was such a great teacher, but I knew after that experience that this was the best teacher I'd ever had. I learned so much about poetry, about how to appreciate poetry, how to tell if something was good from something that wasn't good. And he did this with lots of humor. I mean, every class was an entertainment. I also was in a class that included Larry Levis. It was his last class with Levine at Fresno State. And other people, Bruce Boston, Greg Pape was there, Omar Salinas came in and out of class. And these people were already wonderful poets. The things I was writing were silly and easy to criticize. How Levine would teach is that we would turn in poems to him each week, take it to his office, and his secretary would type them up and mimeograph them. You know, that's how we did things in the 1967. And during class, we would receive a packet that had all of the poems that had been turned in during the week. Then Phil would sit in front of the class at a desk, and he would talk about one of the poems. He would start at the beginning and read the poem first, and he read it as if it was his poem. So his voice, you know, is just a wonderful voice for poetry. When he finished reading, everything sounded like it was made out of gold. And then he would start talking about it. Sometimes he would look at the back side of the piece of paper and see that it was blank and say, you know, this is the best part of this poem. He was hypercritical, but not in a way that was cruel, and in a way that constantly guided you toward what was good. He wanted you to be as good as he was. He didn't want you to write just good poetry. He wanted you to write the best poetry. And that's what he instilled in us, in all of us, I think. This is Potluck at Katharine Hepburn's for Clifford Olson. It's actually about a lesson he taught me about entertaining. It isn't really to Katharine Hepburn's we are going, though you insist I cook my best dish as if it was. There will be plenty of time to be ordinary, you tell me, after the worms take the last worry from our faces. In this world, there are many parties, most of which we are not invited to. Ordinary persons go to ordinary parties, sit outside the conversation close to the wine and chips, have someone else's way with words until it's time to go. You never go to an ordinary party, usually arriving ahead of President Carter, in time to introduce Aretha to Mother Teresa. And when the Dalai Lama forgets the punchline to the joke he's telling Liz Taylor, it's you, there in the middle, whose every gesture is followed to the end of the story. The art of entertaining, you often say, is to be the host at other people's parties, a guest at your own. As a good host would always suggest a dish to bring to the potluck, so a good guest would be remiss in not bringing a dish befitting the host who has such famous friends. I started to write poetry. Well, what I did was I wrote one poem. I finished a poem I had worked on for a long time, and eventually I read it in public here in Ventura, and felt really good about that experience. And then that following week, after I first read it, I started to write something else, something longer, more important, and I discovered that I'd had that this writing, which may have been bottled up in me or was just sort of waiting for some time to come out, started to come out. Out of the house before sunrise for the first time in months, I'm at the counter of a small cafe 15 minutes walk from my house. My fingers around a cup of sweet coffee, tapping in time to the grating of the continent's drifting plates, and syncopated yawns of everybody more awake than me. I will not talk to anyone here, even if I was more like my father, a man who could stop any stranger to brag how his children had grown into adults with kind hearts and a civil word for each other. What would I say that could pull these people out of their pennant races, their wistful stares into vacations everywhere except the place they will actually be in another hour, working to pay for this breakfast? Say, for the sake of story, I am, at this moment, exactly like my father. turning to the woman sitting on my right to say, "Morning," as if this is a question to which her "good morning" back answers how the day is going so far, or how impossible so far into the day already for me to be sure of its prospects. But she speaks first, asking for sugar, and I see that she is a student of the past, wearing her hair like a Sunday hat, covered with thick swirls of variegated flowers. What in her eyes must once have been fire plundering across open plains of possibility has become muted and smoky, pointing to something she needs for a drink. And in her gray determination, I see that all that can pass between us, though sweet, is sugar. I, not being like myself but like my father, make an observation on the weather, an astute remark about the chance of rain never before spoken on earth. And because she has never heard rain discussed so cleverly, she turns toward me again, asks for salt. This time I notice her hands, short, thin fingers which hold salt hard like the handle of a knife, which must soften into pillows when they bend to comb the back of her cat, a calico, who drops trails of hair on her nappy sweater to lead her home. She's speaking, but I can't hear the words. I pass the pepper, the ketchup and mustard, the steak sauce, napkins, my fork, then realize she isn't asking for anything. Hers is the labor of Adam, tongue and lip moving in the round and flat shapes of noise that become, on first hearing, the perfect name for a thing. Too sluggish to care about names, I return to myself. My father would have stayed until he took a friend from this place. Even in conjecture, I never lose myself entirely. But then, of course, I know it is you beside me, has been you all along. Here, take my hand. Any day we want, we can do this again. You play the stranger on the bus and the grocery, or I become the stranger taking blood pressure in the doctor's office, sitting beside you at the bargain matinee. I'll remind you of when we dressed in the costumes of some long ago afternoon, working through these parts for the first time. And if it's too hard to repeat just how we played it then, we can make up something new. Remember the time we leave a cafe to go walking in a city park and stop to admire its large pond in the early morning light? The air so still, the surface reflects perfectly the trees, the overcast clouds. A photograph taken now would have no reference for which way is up or down, which half water and which the sky. How lucky we are there to know on what side to put our feet. I have a line in a poem I wrote about Cambodia, which is, any place is like every place. And that's true. Cambodia is the place where I am. And there's many things about it that are very different than California. Those differences to me are exciting. Every day is, an adventure. I never know exactly what I'm going to face, what I'm going to encounter. I never have any doubt that I'm going to get through it, that I'm going to enjoy it, that it's going to be an adventure of some sort. Cambodia reminds me a great deal of when I was a little boy in California in the Central Valley. Everything was done manually, by hand, very old-fashioned. And that's where Cambodia is as a country. The people in our village, they know everybody. They know everything that's going on in the village, and they love to just sit and talk all afternoon and chit-chat about nothing in particular, and about the big issues, and sometimes. The pace of life is very slow. It's very relaxed. We live near the river, and looking at the river is so calming, every day. I see that I see that people should give up their work life at an earlier stage than most people believe that they should. Because as we all know, the future is unknown, and the time left to us is also not known, and it could be very limited. It would be better to spend that time enjoying yourself and living peacefully rather than scrambling around to do other people's jobs. The story of my life. And now I have finished arranging the sheet of paper on the otherwise barren surface of the desktop. Where daylight watches over numbers, I arrange into columns and rows to calculate someone else's profit. First turning the paper a little skewed to the left, then slightly back to the right, left and right, until it finally stays in this one position, a direction so unremarkable no one has yet thought to give it a name. If you look closely, you can already see the amazing story of my life begin to stretch across the vast emptiness of white, with the same care that once spread the dun feathers of a house sparrow across a child's hand, as if sorrow alone could wish flight into the dead wing of the bird from the living hand of the boy. The sparrow had been shot for target practice by a 12-year-old killer who would struggle out of childhood to resemble me. This is only a small diversion in a big story you assume wants to be told with the same worry for details as for the angle of its paper. You may accept the life of this bird as the price of a child's contrition as you accept the dinner chicken at the end of a hard day. Your compassion isn't shaken, even when I tell you that what you have learned all your life to call a sparrow is a finch, not scientifically a sparrow at all. What fact have you ever known that couldn't be changed? The feathers which opened across the white palm were the fingers on the right hand of my friend whose father owned the shotgun we were using. Each life is diminished by each day that succeeds. My friend was wearing a yellow t-shirt on the day we went shooting, a proud shirt that only advertised its color. Why did I save such a small detail from a day on which so much was lost? Even the color of the shirt I was wearing ran from my memory faster than I could run for help. If I could change the facts of my life, I would tell you that my friend was spared. The last new thing the world would give him to learn would be the old number of the day it tired of his stupidity. I would make him grateful to be alive even for the unhappy nights he would awaken to his voice screaming out the names of the loves that abandoned him to the dark. I would change all that and more, and it wouldn't matter to you. You are already turning your pity into blame, and I am becoming the villain in my own story. One at a time, you will move away from me. After all, he was not your friend. This is not your tragedy. You have your own faint rustle of wings to chase after. Only pain thinks enough of us to stay for our company. His was the easy death that is promised the good. What more do you have to know? Make your judgment here, now. We don't have to wait for the reckoning to show us how we hurt one another so deeply. 40 years later, I'm watching a man who believes Jesus asked him to yell at people from a street corner. He is shouting at me, but not more specifically me than anyone else, and actually at no one. Nothing he says loud enough the cold wind doesn't blow it away. His hair is long and dark against the pale white of his face. For a moment, it could be he, come down from stained glass with his fiery heart and the sacrament of forgetting. But in the next moment, and despite all his urgency, it becomes clear he is not the one with the secret words that grant redemption, something he will be the last to know. When is a door not a door? The silly children's riddle, the only prayer that comes to mind. I'm sure he will find it wanting, though it is complete in the way that all prayers are really questions with easy answers. When is a man not anything else? It starts to rain. The whole city becomes the two of us facing each other across the street. I turn away to follow the wetbacks of pigeons. The puddles tear themselves apart on the sidewalk. And though it is still afternoon, the town is dark under the shade of wings and the clouds that stretch above them. Because I can name every street in my path, I am certain where I am. Just as I am certain I have seen this exact rain before. This is the rain that fell on the day of my friend's funeral. And so the story returns to blood. Martyr's blood, you believe, or the praise. But in any case, not your blood this time, not mine. What I want gets confused with what I ask for. And what I ask for is to have all my loves gathered in one place when disaster happens. The airplane crashes, an earthquake opens the ground under our dancing feet. A terrorist removes the last line of poetry from his face. The unspeakable, sparing us the unbearable. But this is not a place where anyone is spared. The feather in my hand is painted with the brown mud of the road on which it fell. The bird which was the painting the feather colored learned long ago how many parts could be lost before there was nothing left to remind it of itself. Any small wind is all that is needed to take a human voice away from what it loves. And in less time than it takes to say this, even the air won't remember what it heard. I am telling you the truth in the same space I could tell you a lie. The two so beautiful together, which of us could bear to pull them apart? Go away now. There's nothing more to learn here. The story comes to what it always wanted, the hush at its end. What remains of the paper, white, perfectly silent, forgiven.